pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next order of business is public comments. Any public comments this evening? All right. On to number 4, which is acceptance of minutes. We have one set of minutes. Make a motion that we move to accept and approve the meeting minutes of May 8th, 2018 as shown. Second. Thank you, David. Any comments on the minutes of May 18th? He's raising his hand back there. I thought I had a question. All right, so no questions, all those in favor? Thank you. Correspondence items A through E.
I have a quick question. I think this is the one that I had the question on. Andrew, can you speak to whatever degree you're able to on the letter from Verizon, where they're indicating, or actually, I guess it's from the Department of Telecommunications, where they tell us that Verizon's contract with Maynard expires November 25th of 2018, which is coming up 6 months away. Can you clarify, does this mean that Verizon will not be able to provide cable service in Maynard? What's the impact?
So it's a regulated utility, and
Correct.
The Commonwealth is reminding us that our 10-year contract with Verizon is about to expire, and these contracts take a long time to negotiate, and we shouldn't be waiting to the last minute. So that's essentially a friendly reminder. We've been negotiating with both Comcast and Verizon for several months, and
That's what I thought.
yeah, we'll have an agreement by July probably.
My recollection was that Kevin was still here, and he had said that
started with
they
him.
were not going to be agreeing to a 10-year contract, which typically they did, because they don't know how much longer they're going to be in the game. That was his quote. And my concern upon seeing this letter was that, okay, we haven't still finalized the deal, and now we're out of time, and now we're going to be losing, based on what Kevin had said. They're not going to be in the game much longer.
No,
Maybe much longer was much less time than what he had anticipated.
Yeah, it will likely be a shorter contract, but we're not in danger of losing out. And the letter actually is supposed to have a date in it when we're supposed to respond. It's actually blank. And I called the state and also asked them where our Comcast letter was. And so in your next packet, you'll see a Comcast letter.
It is in there. The corrected letter is in there.
Oh, okay. So
The
Becky's
second.
already received the corrections. So in any case, we're on top of it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I put it
Sorry,
in
Chris.
All
there.
right, so make a motion to move to accept the correspondence items A through E as shown.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further questions about A through E?
No, I'd just say, Andrew, thank you for the updates on the conversations that are happening around Rockland Avenue.
Yeah.
Some
Okay.
work was done there today.
Okay, all those in favor? Thank you. Next up is the consent agenda. There's only one item. And I make a motion that we move to accept and approve the consent item as shown.
Second.
Any questions? Permit for Memorial Park concert.
No, but for those who weren't at the Cultural Council event, it was announced that evening who the performer will be this year, and it's, I'm not familiar with her, but Karen Allison, who apparently is a she's been nominated for Grammys multi-times, and I think she's a jazz performist, and Mark Malcolm was very happy to have her coming, so I assume she's talented.
Okay. All right, so all those in favor? thank you. All right. Now we are on to Town Administrator Search Committee update, and they all just came in. Are we all, or just?
Except for the chair.
Okay. He has shorter legs, it takes him a little longer.
The chair has no report.
Sorry.
It's right with us.
Someone's getting pulled over tonight.
Good luck getting home.
I will not have a problem.
Okay, here we go.
Here he comes. All right. Who's speaking for the group? Mr. Noble?
He's wearing his gun.
Yeah.
Great.
Good thing you didn't hear your
one everybody
comments
was
earlier.
That's great.
Got it.
What is
Over the
this?
other eyes.
That's just the report,
Okay.
the report of the committee.
Okay. Okay.
Ms. Ackers?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As you know, on February 6th, the committee of myself, Justine St. John, Don Capello, Paula Copley, Donna Dobson, William Doyle, Jim Hines, Amy Lovelace, and James McCann were appointed for the Town Administrator Search Committee for the new Town Administrator. On February 9th, we had our first meeting, which gave us 120 days from that meeting to put forward 3 to 5 candidates. On February 14th, we interviewed a consultant. We decided that we did not need the consultant services at that time. On February 15th, we put out the job posting, which is attached to yours there, for the job. On March 6th, we sent out surveys to employees and selectmen to fill out. On the 16th, when the posting was closed, we had 33 total applicants that applied. By March 22nd, we had narrowed that down to 12 to give 12 persons an interview. On March 27th, the committee held a community forum at the library to get community feedback. Between April 23rd and May 10th, we held, on 6 separate nights, we held interviews. We started with 12, 3 candidates dropped out prior to their interviews, therefore we interviewed 9. Tonight, we present the final candidates to the Board of Selectmen for that. There are 5 candidates pursuant to Article 4, Section 6 of the Maynard Town Charter. Finally, I'd like to thank all the committee members for their hard work and dedication to the process for the next town administrator. Every committee member took the role serious and with pride. Every member committed a great deal of time and effort to this process. I believe we accomplished our task and was able to provide the board with highly qualified candidates.
Anybody have any questions?
Will you,
I-
along, go ahead.
I will be presenting, the candidates' names are in here for you to open up an executive session, give us a little time to contact both
Yep.
candidates that didn't make it and the candidates that did, thereby being able to notify their employers before their names go public.
Will you be sharing, either through that folder or somewhere else, the questions that you said in the thing that you asked the same 10 questions?
We can share them. I did not put them in, but if the committee would like, if the board would
I'd be
like.
interested to see them, just so I sort of have an understanding of what the discussion was and how it led to the decision, perhaps, to, you know.
Yeah. I'll
And it also
I'll get
might
those to the
generate
board.
some questions for when we have to interview.
Okay. Yeah, not a problem. We can get those type of questions.
Okay. Melissa, anything? No? Cheryl?
No, pretty
I don't have
straightforward,
any
thank you.
questions either. I just want to thank, all 9 of you for the time you put into it. I know, several of you I know on a more personal basis than others, and seeing about 10, I know it's taken up quite a bit of your time, and we certainly, as the 4 of us, and I know Terrence feels the same way, appreciate it, as does, will everybody else in town once we get the 3 names and proceed. So,
5 names.
thank you all very
5
much.
names.
3 or 5?
5.
5.
All right, 5 names. A little more time on our schedule. But we'll wait until we hear from you, Mike, to make any contact with anybody and share any information based on the phone calls that you have to make so that they have an opportunity to, alert their employer if they're a finalist or whether or not they want to, so.
There were phone calls made tonight
Okay.
to all the candidates, so a message were left. I'm going to follow up with emails in the morning, so
Yeah.
I can confidently say by Thursday,
Yeah,
you
so
can start contact.
we'll wait until we hear from you then, tomorrow, Thursday, whenever, to
Okay.
reach out to anybody so we don't end up in the same situation we ended up in a couple of times, kind of surprised. Other than that, we thank you all for volunteering to be on this board, and we appreciate the hard work you put into it, and we look forward to a new town administrator.
Who gets to hold the envelope?
Chair.
I hope I don't lose it. I'll put it in my golf
I'm pretty sure
bag.
they know what they put into it.
All right, so we'll open that another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
You guys don't want to stick around for some fun?
Uh-huh.
All right.
Somebody forgot their umbrella? Chris, I'm not positive, but I believe the charter says that the committee automatically disbands once it does what it's done. But if it doesn't, at some future meeting, we'll have to formally disband them.
I believe you're right.
Done. All right, we'll do that.
I can check
We'll
the
have
charter.
Mike, we'll just have Mike stop by at the next meeting and.
It's readily
officially
available on Board
disband
Docs.
it. Yeah,
We have the charter on there.
I know,
yeah,
that's,
no, everything is.
Yeah, I can check to be certain, but
I thought that's what the last page was, but it wasn't. All right, next up is town council.
we
Attorney
need to
Costa?
set the, you want to set the meeting for the interviews? That's within that same agenda
Oh,
topic, where you
yeah.
can table it.
Well, no, how can we set the meeting for the interviews without talking to the candidates first?
Well, at least identifying dates that are collectively good for us,
Yeah, it
right?
was a to-do item from the last meeting for the board members, to come in with the dates
Yeah,
that you
I-
were available or not available.
Yeah. I didn't get any dates from Terrence. I don't have Melissa's dates, but
I sent you some dates.
yeah, I have your dates and I have Cheryl's dates. So I guess we can kind of set those through email, because I don't have all the dates. I have kind of shouted them on the calendar, but I haven't gotten Terrence's and he's traveling, so we'll set those up in the next few days via email if everyone's okay with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just to flagging, I mean, it looks, it's gonna be tight. I don't know whether it's useful to maybe use what we've got for data right now to see what are the resulting dates that are potentially available / tricky, and see if those would work for those who've not yet submitted blockout dates. And then I think also for folks to looking through what's in executive content in terms of what are blockout dates, if those are truly the entire day is blocked out, or if it's, if someone's on travel, like I know what my dates are tied to, I'm remote. But if there are potential windows in those days where one could be available, because just if folks take the time to peruse what's down there, it's like 2 solid weeks are gone.
And
So-
how are we doing the interviews? Like 2-hour blocks each time we set aside a day, or?
We have, in the past, we've done, like, 3 interviews one night, 2 interviews the other night, or,
Okay.
as I mentioned at our last meeting, we did do interviews on a Saturday, one time, which, it gives you more time, and then we actually deliberated on the Saturday and finalized everything on a Saturday. So, but, as I also mentioned, it's graduation season, it's travel season for work, it's a lot of different.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the dates are in there, so I mean, maybe.
And it's vacation time,
Mhm.
right when we get to, well, we have to finish by July, so
Technically June 15th, based on the
30
charter,
days.
but you guys can
15th, we have to finish.
violate the charter, the town won't fall apart. There's no penalty in the charter for
I feel like Adam smirking.
I was like,
31 days.
I could come up with one.
No.
So I'm happy to take a look back through, given the blockout dates that have been provided to you, Chris, and send a follow-up email just clarifying if there are windows between
Yeah,
that.
that's fine. Did you get David's dates? I'll forward you David's dates.
Yeah, I can send some tonight too.
Mine just,
And as I mentioned, my my work situation is sort of fluid right now, but I am going to try, do my damnedest to
I'm gonna
make it
forward you.
work.
All right, so I just forwarded you David's, and that's fine. And I'll reach out to Terrence tonight and ask him to send them to us.
Cool.
I just don't think we should do all 5 on one night, 'cause I think
No.
No, that won't,
Well,
that'd be a disservice.
In the things that we watched prior to Kevin leaving, those averaged about 2 hours apiece. So, if we're gonna take that long or not, but hour and a half apiece, so that's, 3 hours a night is enough.
break. I think one time we also, we started at like 5:30 and had dinner brought in, like pizza or something. We went to the back room and had pizza and then came back and did the next one. Or
So
the
maybe
next
like two a night with a 15-minute break or something like that,
Yeah.
and then the 5th on a 3rd night?
Or 3 and 2,
Okay.
to limit the
With the
possibility
idea of it being a
conflicts.
minimum of being a 4-hour window for the 3.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we'll get those done by the end of the week.
Okay.
And we'll try and start to schedule guys, because by then Michael will have done what he was gonna do, as far as reaching out to us. All right. Number 8, Attorney Costa, and 40Bs. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
So thank you for having me on the agenda tonight. I heard you promise the search committee members fun. I can't tell you that 40B will be the most fun topic of the night, but I was asked by Andrew to be here to talk just very generally about Chapter 40B and maybe more specifically about local initiative program and what we often refer to as friendly 40B projects and how they differ from more traditional 40B projects and pros and cons, and answer any questions you might have about the statute or 40B projects. I've had an opportunity, gosh, I guess it was probably about 2, maybe 3 months ago, to meet with the Zoning Board of Appeals, not on the specific Powder Mill Place project, but just very generally about Chapter 40B and about the process and their role in the process. They are the permitting authority under Chapter 40B, whether it's a friendly or an unfriendly project, as they say. And so the permit gets issued not by your board, but by the ZBA. But your board has a role in the process, especially if it's a friendly process. And so to give you a bit of a sense as to the potential tracks that a 40B can take, the traditional route requires an applicant first to go to a project subsidy. That subsidy is mass housing, MHP fund, and to get a letter of eligibility from that subsidy indicating that their project is fundable, can be subsidized by that agency. Once that project eligibility letter, or PEL, issues, that then gives the applicant the authority to come to the town, specifically to your Zoning Board of Appeals, and to make application for a comprehensive permit. And as you probably know, the hallmark of a comprehensive permit project is that it gives an applicant the ability to seek waivers or exceptions from otherwise applicable bylaws, rules, regulations of the town. It's not a blanket exemption from your bylaws, but it gives an applicant the opportunity to seek waivers from specific provisions of your bylaws, of your rules and regulations. And it's one-stop shopping for an applicant. An applicant need not go to various permitting authorities to get site plan approval, special permit, variance. They go to, generally, for purposes of local permits and approvals, one board and one board only, and that's your Zoning Board of Appeals. They go to the ZBA, they make application for a comprehensive permit, and the ZBA issues the permit, which is sort of the equivalent of a special permit, although it's treated somewhat differently in the law. But they also act in issuing any approvals that might be required under a local wetlands bylaw. They also act to issue any approvals that might be required under a local Board of Health rule or regulation governing septic, for example, if the project were to be on septic. They don't issue state approvals. State approvals are still issued by the board or commission or committee that otherwise has that jurisdiction. So an order of conditions under the Wetlands Protection Act still comes from the Conservation Commission. Title V still applies and the Board of Health retains its authority, but all local permits get issued by your zoning board of appeals. So that's the traditional 40B route. Applicant goes to the subsidy, then comes to the zoning board of appeals, goes through a process that tends to be a comprehensive process, hence the name comprehensive permit. Comprehensive permits aren't issued in a single meeting. I've probably worked on 50, 60, 70 comprehensive permit projects over the past decade or so. And I've had projects that have gone 4 or 5 meetings. I've had projects that have gone 25 meetings. So they are comprehensive reviews. Typically, outside consultants are engaged by your zoning board of appeals to assist it with those reviews. And ultimately, what issues is a comprehensive permit. The LIP process, the local initiative program process, the process that would involve your board, is no different than what I just described, except that prior to an applicant going to the project subsidy, Mass Housing, MHP fund, the applicant first comes to your board and says, rather than pursue the more traditional 40B route, which is often referred to as the unfriendly 40B, we'd like it to be a friendly 40B. We'd like to work cooperatively with the town and with your board and ultimately with your zoning board of appeals to try and address the concerns that the town might have and address them prospectively. I think that the concept of friendly versus unfriendly, those are somewhat of misnomers, because I've had traditional 40Bs that are relatively friendly, and I've had local initiative program projects that have been quite unfriendly. So there's no guarantee. But the idea is that an applicant comes to you first, seeks your endorsement, not an approval, not a permit that you issue. You simply endorse the project before it goes to the subsidy. The subsidy is a bit different. It's not Mass Housing, it's not MHP, it's the Department of Housing and Community Development itself, which generally oversees that they adopted the 40B regulations. They oversee the Chapter 40B program for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So the HCD issues the letter of eligibility itself, and then they follow the same route. They come to your zoning board of appeals and they seek an approval. So the only difference, it's really front-loaded, is that under the local initiative program, the applicant first comes to you and seeks your endorsement. So what does that really mean, practically speaking? You might ask, who cares if they've got our endorsement or not? They don't need it. They can go to the other sorts of subsidies and get their letter. Well, from the applicant's perspective, it doesn't guarantee them, but it provides typically for a friendlier process. The perception and usually the reality is that they work more cooperatively with the town, with your zoning board of appeals. The benefit for your board and for the town is that you get in, I guess I'll say, on the ground floor. You've got the opportunity to influence the project before it even really gets underway. You can make your concerns known. Now, some of those concerns would be made known through the ZBA process anyway. The ZBA has certain authority in reviewing the comprehensive permit to condition any decision that it issues. But boards of selectmen have the opportunity through the LIP process to do things like enter into development agreements with applicants before they even get their subsidy, and to work cooperatively with them to not just facilitate the development of their project, but to work toward things like mitigation packages that would provide benefits to the town that might be difficult to get through the traditional ZBA process. Of the LIP projects I've worked on, I would say about half of them have involved development agreements. Many have not involved development agreements, but there has generally been a commitment or a series of commitments made by an applicant to a board of selectmen prior to even going to the subsidy that the project would be designed in such a way, would be conditioned in such a way, would include a package of mitigation that might not otherwise be offered through the traditional Chapter 40B route. So that's the benefit from a municipal perspective to endorsing a Chapter 40B project and going the LIP route, is that you have that say early on in the project. Again, you get in on the ground floor, you have the ability to try and influence the project. I've seen projects come in to boards as 80-unit garden-style towers, and the board says, oh gosh, we don't want that here. And what happens even before the application is made to the subsidy, to DHCD, is that through the negotiations that occur with or without a development agreement, the applicant converts what would have been the several-story 80-unit tower to a series of townhomes, maybe 60 townhomes on a site that could accommodate them based upon feedback received from the municipality. Consistency with a master plan or a comprehensive plan, a vision for the particular location where the project is proposed. So again, some of that can occur through the ZBA process. I don't want to mislead the board and make you think that you don't have a say in that respect, but comprehensive permits are challenging because I would not be giving it to you straight if I said you can deny the project and you're entitled to the same deference that you'd be entitled to if this were a special permit or a variance. ZBAs deny variances with some frequency in many communities. They also deny special permits with some frequency. And if you look at the success rate of municipalities before the land court, Superior Court, municipalities win more than they lose because the courts have consistently said municipalities, municipal boards, whether they're planning boards or zoning boards, they've got a better sense of local conditions than some judge sitting in Boston. And so they defer to the municipal boards, and unless it can really be shown that the board was acting in an arbitrary manner, a capricious manner, the court will uphold the decision made by the board. You're not entitled, or your ZBA is not entitled to that same deference under Chapter 40B. 40B employs a different standard that essentially balances the presumptive need for affordable housing in Massachusetts and all communities in Massachusetts that haven't satisfied the thresholds that are contained in the law against local needs. And only when the local needs trump the presumptive need for affordable housing will the Housing Appeals Committee or the Superior Court rule in favor of the municipality. And the statistics are actually flipped. It's upwards of 90% of the time the municipality loses when they outright deny a Chapter 40B development. So you have to be mindful of that, and you've got to either cite the specific local concerns that truly justify the denial of the project, or you have to approve it but condition it in a way that is protective of municipal interests. So keeping all that in mind, that again is the benefit, or at least some communities have perceived it as a benefit. I'm not suggesting that you should. I defer to your discretion, but some communities have opted for the LIP process because they believe it gives them the ability to negotiate some of those finer points, things that they might not have success negotiating through their ZBA. And if they were to be imposed as conditions of a permit by the ZBA, they might not withstand an appeal.
Can I just ask a point of clarification on that? So if I'm tracking, like hypothetical scenario where Board of Selectmen decides to go through a LIP process, there's discussion of a development agreement, Board of Selectmen comes to terms, it goes forward as a friendly 40B, it gets the appropriate approvals at the state level, it still has to come back for zoning board of approval. The zoning board could theoretically still through its hearing process, so let's say that the project proposal that goes through the LIP and gets approved is consistent with sort of the recommendations, insights, perspectives that the Board of Selectmen put forward in the development agreement, but it still has to come back through the zoning board for approval of any permits or waivers or variances, which could still sort of stretch out. They might get not approved, et cetera. If that went to the point of arbitration, right, where let's say the developer says, hey, but wait a minute, state of Massachusetts, here's what we put forward, this is what we asked for. What I'm hearing you say is that in that scenario, the town would be more likely to prevail with its interests if the same scenario happened under the conventional, but in that case, the developer would be more likely to prevail if the zoning board was not approving the requests.
But I think I'm saying something slightly different.
Okay.
So once you get to the point of an appeal, and just for clarity, when there's an appeal of a Chapter 40B permit, whether it's a approval or a denial, an appeal by the developer goes to this Housing Appeals Committee. It's a state agency created simply to hear Chapter 40B appeals. When there is an abutter appeal, for example, that appeal goes directly to court, but there's this agency that deals with developer appeals. Once you're within the confines of the Housing Appeals Committee process, there's no benefit LIP versus traditional 40B. The benefit arises during the comprehensive permit process generally at the local level.
Okay.
The idea is, and again, I'm not saying that it works out this way in every instance, but the idea is that by getting in early, by making your concerns known, you're the Board of Selectmen, you speak for the town of Maynard more than any other board or commission or committee of your town does. You are the chief executive official. So you're presumed to know what the interests of the town are, the taxpayers, the residents. And so you have the opportunity, not just your ZBA, you have the opportunity to try to influence the project now, as opposed to simply deferring the process to the zoning board of appeals through the imposition of conditions. And when an applicant makes commitments to you, particularly through something like a development agreement at this stage in the process, they're bound or faced with breach of contract by the conditions in that development agreement, the contract that they've signed. If they get conditions in a ZBA decision that they're not satisfied with, they just appeal it to the Housing Appeals Committee and say, please strike the conditions.
Got it.
Regardless of whether it's a LIP project or a traditional 40B project, unfortunately, the odds at the HAC are still about the same. Municipalities lose far more than they win. But of course, every case is different, every project's different.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. So that's a summary that I had. I know the agenda said presentation. That's really all that I had for you tonight, but I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions that you might have about the process or about the pros and cons, your role, the ZBA's role, et cetera.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
First off, you did not mention safe harbor
Yes.
and communities' opportunities to avoid 40B through safe harbor.
Right.
And I wonder if you can discuss Maynard's situation relative to our position on safe harbor, and what your position is and your opinion is relative to Maynard's ability to win a safe harbor argument with our situation as we've presented it to you.
Sure. So I'm going to say a couple of things about safe harbor. I'll talk about it very, very generally in terms of what the regulations state and what the opportunities are. I'll then give you a sense as to what I've been advised and the information that I've been provided. I'm not going to give you legal advice in an open meeting with the applicant present as to where I believe the strengths and weaknesses of a safe harbor
Fair enough.
argument might lie. What I can say is that the regulations, which were drafted a couple of decades ago, they were recodified back in 2008. The regulations provide for certain instances where a municipality can outright deny a Chapter 40B development. And they are when you've satisfied your statutory minima, and there are a few different options for doing that, or when you otherwise qualify for, as you said, a safe harbor. The most well-known statutory minimum is the 10% standard. If 10% of the dwelling units in your community are restricted as quote-unquote affordable units, as determined to be affordable by DHCD, then you have met your threshold, and you can outright deny Chapter 40B developments, and you're not held to that same standard, that same balancing of the presumptive need for affordable housing against local needs. That wouldn't apply. You're presumed to have had the right to deny that project the same way you could deny a special permit or a variance. If you haven't met that minimum, that 10% threshold, there are other mechanisms that can be used, one of which, and I think it's the one that you're referencing, is this 1.5% land area minimum. If affordable housing is constructed on 1.5% of the community's land area that is dedicated to area for residential, commercial, industrial use, excluding things like water bodies or open space, then you would meet one of your other thresholds, and you wouldn't need to meet the 10%. You'd have met this other threshold, which in and of itself, independently, could serve as a basis for gaining that same authority, the ability to outright deny a Chapter 40B development and not be subject to that balancing act. I'll say a couple of things about the 1.5%. The first is it's been the subject of much discussion lately, and in fact, even some guidance documents that have issued from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The challenge has always been, and very few communities have been deemed to have met, I think there's only a couple in the state, the 1.5% minimum, because of the way that DHCD has traditionally calculated it. You might think that if your zoning board of appeals has previously, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, approved of a Chapter 40B development elsewhere in town, and let's say that Chapter 40B development was on a 50-acre parcel, you say, excellent, that's 50 acres that counts toward our 1.5% land area minimum. Well, not so quick. If that 50 acres was comprised of 20 acres of open space and 30 acres of housing, you automatically exclude the open space because there's no affordable housing constructed on the open space. If that project was 25% affordable because it was an ownership project, most ownership projects under Chapter 40B are only required to be 25% affordable. 1 out of every 4 units is affordable. The other 3, 1 out of every 4 units, the other 3 are market rate. Then again, what DHCD has done is they determined that you got to take the remaining 30 acres and you have to now divide that by 4, and only 25% of that is land used for affordable housing. So they've really managed to diminish the numbers that you think you have just based upon properties that you've deemed to be dedicated to affordable housing. Now, I'm not saying that's the case in Maynard. I know that you had some studies done a number of years ago and you had analysis done parcel by parcel, and I guess I'll leave it at saying that I think you've got a case to make that you've met the statutory minimum. Now, there's a process for exerting your right. You can't go to DHCD today and say, because I get this question often, have we met our 1.5% land area minimum? Please issue a determination, an advisory opinion, so we know in advance that we can deny projects. It doesn't work that way. The only mechanism by which DHCD will opine on your satisfaction of one of the statutory minima or the safe harbor is when an application is submitted and is received by the Zoning Board of Appeals. The ZBA has 20 days from the date of its opening of the public hearing to notify the applicant that it believes it has met the statutory minimum or the safe harbor, and then it can still proceed with the review process. But it's essentially vesting its rights and putting the applicant on notice that if it ultimately denies the project, it believes that's one ground upon which it could deny the project. There's a whole process within the regulations where the applicant can immediately appeal that determination, and the process before the ZBA is essentially frozen, it's paused, and there's a proceeding that occurs at the Housing Appeals Committee where the Housing Appeals Committee would determine the issue right then and there. But the applicant doesn't necessarily need to make that appeal. The applicant can just carry on with its application, and you've essentially vested your rights and you've reserved the right to deny it on that basis when the process is complete. So there is a process, again, under the regulations, and certainly I would expect that if your Zoning Board of Appeals were to receive a Chapter 40B application, which it hasn't yet, that it would engage our services as counsel to assist it with the process, and we'd obviously have that discussion with them and make them aware of the appropriate deadlines.
Just curious, how long does that process, if there's an appeal on the basis of safe harbor, how long does that last?
So the substantial majority of cases before the HAC are post-permit decision cases. Occasionally, there are these cases that arise from things like that sort of a challenge that is just described, a request for an insubstantial change post-issuance of a permit that comes before the HAC. Those other types of matters that come before the HAC tend to be resolved relatively quickly. It'd be hard for me to give you an exact time frame, but I'm thinking a matter of, a few months as opposed to, a year and a half or 2 years, which is how long it could take for a full Housing Appeals Committee proceeding to play out post permit decision.
Do you have any questions? I have others, I just don't want to.
Oh, I can ask you a quick one.
Sure.
I assume if the Board of Selectmen were to endorse any kind of LIP, it could be done with contingencies as part of any kind of development agreement, like we're only going to approve if X, Y, and Z conditions are met.
Right, so that's correct. Obviously, you need some form of contract to bind the developer to the promises it's making. So that's often done by way of a development agreement. You've got to exercise caution when you're negotiating those agreements because the project subsidies don't want to know that something has occurred outside the traditional Chapter 40B process. You have to be mindful of the authority that the Zoning Board of Appeals has and not attempt to negotiate things that could be contrary to what's within its jurisdiction and the sorts of conditions that it could impose. The only flaw or the most prevalent flaw that is made, I think, by boards of selectmen when they're talking when they're negotiating a potential development agreement on a LIP project well before the matter ever comes to the ZBA, is they try to get into the weeds a bit too much. And these projects tend to evolve when they're before the Zoning Board of Appeals. What is presented on night 1 is often not the same as what's presented on night 101. And so you'd want to look at big ticket items. Development agreements have addressed everything from impact on fire services and a commitment by the applicant to provide funding for the purchase of a fire truck, to concerns about traffic in the area surrounding the development and commitments by the applicant to make infrastructure improvements, roadway improvements, intersection improvements, install lights, things like that, or provide the funding for those kinds of improvements. When you start getting into the details of the project, well, we'd really like you to relocate this building from this portion of the site to that portion of the site. Again, you have the ability to do that, but you just sort of have to be cautious about when it gets to the ZBA, what happens if the stormwater doesn't quite work, because they probably don't have their stormwater plan complete at the time of the LIP negotiations. If the stormwater doesn't work and they've got to modify it, now they're in violation of the development agreement. So there is a bit of a juggling act, but certainly with big ticket items, they're subject to discussion, negotiation, and to the extent the applicant is willing to its commitment in a development agreement.
Can you talk a little bit, any follow-up? Yeah. Oh, can you talk a little bit about any projects that you are aware of, just hypothetical, that have involved 2 communities, that would also involve not only, would involve infrastructure of the community, theoretically, And where the infrastructure issue is affected, and whether or not there would be, I know I've read about intermunicipal agreements that are required, I believe, when you're sharing things like water and sewer. How does that get worked? First off, the first half of the question is, are you aware of any? Secondly is, how does that work, and when would you have that intermunicipal agreement? Because presumably, both communities have to agree that they're going to go enter a project in the same fashion, I would think, to make it effective. So I know that's not really a question, but it's a comment that I think you see where I'm going with my question.
I do. And so I can tell you first and foremost that I've not worked on any projects where the project site itself has been split. Let me clarify that, where the portion of the project site that's dedicated to buildings, parking area, other improvements has literally been split by a municipal boundary. My guess is there aren't very many cases in Massachusetts where that's occurred. I'm aware of some cases only because some of those cases have made their way into our book of case law. So I know that there have been those sorts of cases in the past where there's been some infrastructure need for a project. That infrastructure isn't served or serviced by the community in which the project is located, but maybe is serviced by an adjacent community because the project site is partly divided by a municipal boundary. And there are other cases, non-40B cases, that also deal with sites that are split by municipal boundaries. And so it's a complicated question because, again, much like I was discussing with the interaction between your ZBA and your board and the development agreement and the issuance of the decision, that's a juggling act. It's the same thing with respect to two communities working together, or not, on the same project. You have obligations. If a project is located entirely within your municipal boundaries, you have obligations to treat that project and provide things like infrastructure to that project, a 40B project, the same way that you would treat and the same way that you would provide infrastructure to a project that was a non-40B project.
That's if it's totally enclosed in the same community.
That's correct. And the case law is quite clear there that, that would be discriminatory effect if your board were to say, or the ZBA were to say, we're not going to provide sewer to the 40B project because it's too dense and we don't like it and we want to deny it, but we would provide sewer to all of the surrounding properties if they were just developed pursuant to underlying zoning. That's not permissible. It gets more complicated when you're talking about, are you obligated to provide infrastructure? Are you obligated to provide services to the entirety of a project, a portion of which is not even located in your community? And again, I'm going to refrain from giving you specific legal advice because I know where the question's going and I know the specific project that's before you in some sense tonight that's on your agenda. But I will say that there are a number of factors that influence the answer to that question. Past precedent. And by that I mean not just with 40B projects, but do you provide this sort of infrastructure to residences, to non-residential structures and other adjacent communities? Have you done that in the past, and on what scale have you done that in the past? Is there an IMA, an intermunicipal agreement between your community and the other community in which this same project is located, and what does that IMA say? What are your obligations under the IMA? What are the other towns' obligations under that IMA? I will say that the Housing Appeals Committee has substantial authority to bend, some would argue break, the rules of your community, bylaws, rules, regulations. The same way that an applicant can seek waivers from bylaws, rules, regulations, the Housing Appeals Committee, when it determines that the ZBA has overstepped, can essentially wipe away those requirements and allow a project to be built. The one thing that the HAC can't do, except in extreme circumstances, is obligate a municipality to enter into, or worse, violate a contractual obligation. And so that's why I say things like the existence of IMAs, existing contractual obligations on your part, on the other municipality's part, they play a role here in the question of to what extent are you obligated to provide services, or are you off the hook for providing services because they're available in the other municipality?
When in a process like that you've described, would an intermunicipal agreement be negotiated with another community?
So I don't think that I'm suggesting, well, I know that I'm not suggesting, and I didn't mean to suggest if I did in my answer, that you would be negotiating the IMA as part of the process. I'm asking whether you've got an IMA that is already in existence that would be affected by a ZBA decision that obligated the town to provide a particular service to a portion of a project that was not located in your community. Is that consistent with the IMA that's in existence? Is it inconsistent with the IMA that's in existence? Maybe there's no IMA in existence, which means it's a non-issue. But that raises additional questions about one's obligation to provide services when there's no IMA. So it's a very complicated issue. It doesn't arise very often because you don't have many of these projects that are split by municipal boundaries, let alone that require, as in this case, certain infrastructure from one and certain other infrastructure from the other.
I think my questions are done for now.
Okay. Cheryl?
No, Melissa asked mine.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask one question?
You got 30 seconds, and I'm throwing you out. Yeah, go ahead.
So,
Well, you have to come over here now, now you've gone and screwed things up, Ron. It's a new rule. New rules.
This
You
won't
gotta
count against your
announce
30
ourselves.
seconds.
The walkover didn't
TV land
count.
care.
Start now.
Ron Calabria, Deer Path. Attorney, is there any difference in when the municipality would have to invoke safe harbor under a LIP versus under a standard 40B? I think you said under a standard 40B, if that's the right term, it would be a ZBA. If it was a LIP, where would that happen?
The answer is at the same time. So it's not the Board of Selectmen that invoke the, or claim the safe harbor or other satisfaction of a statutory minimum. It's the ZBA that invokes that right, and they do it as part of the process. It's spelled out exactly when it occurs. Again, it's within 20 days of the opening of the public hearing before the ZBA.
Just as a follow-up to that, are there legal fees associated with that to the town if the town chose to go down that route?
Down the route of alleging that.
Like asserting our safe harbor rights and, I guess, pursuing an appeal or determination letter from the state?
Sure. So obviously, 40B is sort of a complicated process. Whether we're dealing with a potential LIP and a development agreement being negotiated, whether we're talking about the process before the Zoning Board of Appeals, which can go many months, or we're talking about things like asserting one's safe harbor rights or pursuing or defending against an appeal. We can have discussions about what is, our arrangement, our firm's arrangement with the town, so we could have a discussion offline about what's included in our fee, what's excluded from our fee. But yes, some of the representation is obviously part of what we provide on a month-to-month basis is within the cost that we charge the town. Other matters which would be deemed litigation might be outside the fee that we charge the town. I would tell you that it's not a particularly expensive undertaking, whether it would be billed as part of your fee or as on an hourly basis to pursue the safe harbor. It's really, you put them on notice, they either appeal or don't appeal, and then you make your case to the Housing Appeals Committee, and the Housing Appeals Committee decides. It's not something that would take many, many months or would be especially expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Easy for me to say.
Okay. So we've had a couple discussions about different types of meetings, public meetings or public hearings, and or either or both. When are they appropriate in a 40B situation?
So again, I'll differentiate between a traditional 40B and the LIP. So with a traditional 40B, the first that you know, let me be clearer. So the first that you know of a traditional 40B is that prior to an applicant making its application for a preliminary determination of eligibility from the subsidy, I mentioned that the first time they come before a board is a ZBA. You actually get notice from the subsidy once they've submitted their application, and there's a 30-day comment period during which the town has the opportunity to send written comments into the subsidizing agency. But there's nothing formal before the board. There's no public meeting or public hearing. So the first that anything appears before the town is before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that's governed entirely by statute, much the same as under Chapter 40A under the Zoning Act. So it's a public hearing, abutter is abutters to abutters within 300 feet, individuals opposite public or private ways, they all get notice in advance of the hearing, notice gets published in a newspaper of general circulation 2 consecutive weeks. All of that occurs the same way that it will with a special permit or a variance. That's a public hearing process, meaning that the public has an opportunity not only to attend, but to participate in the process. Different from the LIP. So if a project begins as a LIP project and comes before your board, generally, meetings can be held at any time to have discussions with the applicant. Those meetings obviously are subject to the open meeting law, and so they're open meetings, they're public meetings. There's no right to public participation per se. That's left to the discretion of the chair, like any other meeting. But they're public meetings if you're going to have a quorum present. Often when you're doing something like negotiating a development agreement, you'll have a representative of your board sit down and sort of work through the details of it, because those are arduous sessions that sometimes go on for hour after hour after hour, and sometimes over the course of many weeks or many months. Once that document is completed, you would then present it to the entire board for the board to review and vote on the agreement, as it would be required to do to take action. And then for purposes of the determination as to whether you're going to sign on to the LIP application, that would also be a public meeting that you would hold. Again, left to the chair's discretion as to whether you're going to permit public participation at that meeting. Because again, it's not a permit that you're issuing, it's not an approval that you're issuing. When the applicant walks away from that meeting with or without your endorsement, it can't go to the bank with what it's got. All it can do is go to the subsidy and make application, and then ultimately come back to your zoning board of appeals.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Can you tell us any timeline required? Do we have to, like, for instance, a LIP comes in, do we have to deal with this within 60 days or 90 days, or are there hard deadlines in terms of moving the process forward?
Sure. So there are no hard deadlines with respect to the LIP. The LIPs are, again, meant to be cooperative. So what I see typically occur is a developer approaches town manager, assistant town manager, the board, and requests an opportunity to get on the agenda, to present its project, to speak to the town manager or assistant town manager, and to discuss the possibility of a friendly 40B. Those meetings become work sessions sometimes. Occasionally there are development agreements negotiated, and then there's a public meeting at which the board votes to sign the development agreement or to endorse the project. No timeframes really associated with that process. Once the matter gets before the Zoning Board of Appeals, there are timeframes. There's a deadline by which you have to open the public hearing from the date of receipt of the application. There's a limitation on the length of the public hearing, 180 days from the opening until the close, and then there's a deadline for the actual issuance of the decision following the close of the public hearing. So that's entirely governed by statute, but again, the LIP process is not so much so.
No rush.
No rush, except if an applicant comes and says, I'm contemplating a LIP, and you say, well, we'll get to it when we get to it, eventually the applicant at any time could say, okay, we're just going to go the straight 40B route. So no rush in terms of timeframes by statute, by regulation, just the practical fact that if you've got an interest, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, in working cooperatively with the developer under the LIP process, you're somewhat at the mercy of the developer being willing to continue to work with you.
Anybody else before we thank Attorney Coster and say goodnight? Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Same here.
Item 9. That's some meeting schedule for July, our meeting schedules.
So this was addressed briefly at the last meeting, that there's some vacation and holiday dates coming up that we're looking to see if holding the meetings off the normal schedule makes sense. We were asked to ask the newly to be seated selectmen, who are both here present here tonight, if they had conflicts, and they each had one. So in the packet are the recommended dates, which appear to be minimal conflicts, and that would be the 17th and the 31st. There's also a suggestion about going on the 2nd. So any two of those three dates.
So Justine is unavailable the 24th, and Armin, you're unavailable the 10th? So I mean, July 4th is the Wednesday. I don't know how many people will be interested in the Monday of July 4th week, but I don't have a problem with the 17th and the 31st. Does anybody else?
Not right now, so it looks like that's fine.
It's fine with me as well.
Fine with you guys?
Ms. Steele?
Works for me,
Fall in.
because it works for all of you.
All right, so I guess
4 o'clock in.
the 17th, the
Exactly.
17th of July and the 31st of July, we'll have 2 selectmen meetings.
17th.
All right. All right, we did most of those, things. We just want to run down we're just going to run down the, warrant articles.
Yeah, the big question is the assignment of presenters. Who's going to motion them, who's going to present them? And right now, I believe that the chair is listed as the presenter, as the motion person for all the items.
Which is okay by me.
Council's recommended that we not be the motioner for the first article, which is a citizen's petition, and we can easily arrange to have one of the signatories to that petition be the motioner. That is so that the town is not taking a specific position on that motion, on that article, because it is a citizen's petition.
And that's consistent with what we've done historically when
Sure.
the citizens petitions.
So we'll change that one easily enough, and we already know who the presenter of that one is going to be, so that person is not a citizen. So we'll find a signatory who is a citizen, make the motion, and then the attorney for the applicant will do the presentation.
What did we so graciously will upon Melissa?
Oh, nothing yet, did we?
Oh, no, we found one for you.
Oh,
We
yeah.
found one for you.
We met without you,
I'm not
Melissa.
present for that.
Sorry. So, what?
Article
was it-
17.
No, was it 14? Was it
Teasing.
14?
You own that.
I wouldn't give it up.
I'm gonna have to go back through my notes, but
I think it was it 14? No. 14's Aaron. No, 14's Coleman, Bill Coleman.
Was it the recreation?
Oh, no, what was it?
Who's doing the water and sewer?
Aaron. Aaron is gonna do the water sewer.
no, there was a reason we connected it to Melissa.
Oh, Melissa, the one for the one for the economic development
Yes,
committee. Council.
that's
because she's the liaison to the
Yeah,
committee.
yes,
That's
yes.
right.
Where is that
So that's
one?
Article 22, I think.
Yeah,
22, yes.
the 508.
Yes,
agreed
that's
on
it.
Still got it, Chris.
Took a while. All right.
Then there's Community Preservation Fund. Again, I don't know if we're looking to split these up fairly equally. There's 26 articles. If we take away Article 1, there's 25, there's 5 of you. Or if we're just going to
Most of it's pretty,
let it sit the way it is.
most of it's pretty boilerplate stuff. I mean,
Mhm. I don't think Terrence has any yet, though.
Terrence has a couple, yeah.
Okay.
He's got the soccer field or something, right?
Recreation.
So the
Recreation, yeah.
CDC.
Yeah. Bill Coleman has 2 or 3. Andrew has 1 he's gonna do. Aaron has a few.
Terrence has CPC, and he was going to do the school one too, or is he not doing the school?
He was, yeah, he mentioned being interested in that. There's a certain amount of information there that we may want the school to be up on the stage with him, similar to the way Melissa and Attorney Federoff took the stage for the marijuana bylaws a few months ago. But Terrence was interested in that, I think, like a personal interest in the article.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Who has 20? Just curious, that's the overlay surplus. Just want to make sure everyone's,
That's listed for both Krista Silva for motion and
Okay.
presenting,
Yeah,
as is the free cash following it.
yeah. And there's a slide that says that we just covered that in the other room. The 224, and it's broken up 150 and
To explain how we split the paying off the snow and ice deficit.
Snow and ice deficit.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Who has the Coolidge School one?
David does.
Okay.
yeah. That one's probably going to be a
Yeah.
loss.
Yeah, it's gonna, I just think it's gonna be a longer one.
Yeah, it's going to be,
Why? No.
I think the issue, well, the issues that have been out there are just the concern. We were at the Finance Committee meeting last night. It in some ways came up there. It's just the concern about the 15-foot buffer from the property and how, if there is a 15-foot buffer, how, if at all, does that affect the public use of the hill as a sledding recreation location? That will be, I think, a significant concern, along with some concerns based on last night's meeting, some concerns from some relative to how do we assure, for those that are interested in retention of the building as the facade, that the Board of Selectmen works in a manner to assure that. And I think we tried to, to say that we're going to try to be as open as possible with our RFP process so that we give ourselves as much leeway as possible relative to the future uses. But I think that will be some concern from some people, that they want to make sure that there's more control.
More
on
control.
it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what it will boil down to, is a question of, as to whether or not the town will trust in its elected Board of Selectmen to evaluate proposals that come in and make determinations and recommendations in the best interest, or whether the town doubts the ability of its elected officials to do what we were elected to do.
Well, I don't know if I'd be that cynical about it, but I understand your point. It's,
They're kicking the shorts on the way out.
For the selectmen's understanding, the A&R application, if you will, the map that is out there, was created at the behest of the selectmen 2.5 years ago for the purpose of considering the sale of the property. It then sat without a decision, which the board is now pushing forward with this article. The line that was drawn, the 15-foot that people are now questioning, is the minimum setback from a building. So if we were to sell the building, that is a responsible line to draw, because it maximizes the land retained by the town on the park side and does not create a non-conforming lot. So that's the reason the line is where it is. And if you look carefully at the mapping, you'll see care was taken to avoid the slide. For instance, the line would actually go through the slide if we put it in a slightly different location. And
can't get onto the slide, but you.
well, I think that may or may not be accurate, but in the sense of how it was discussed in light level of detail, it's certainly an assumption someone could make. But that was how the line was created. It wasn't created to ruin the sledding hill or.
Oh, I don't think anybody
It was
thinks
to
that
create
that's-
the
that that's
minimal
the case.
conforming lot that could possibly be interesting to a buyer. And this was done again 2.5 years ago. The decision to actually put it on the warrant was made this winter by this board, a different board, than asked for the survey work to be done. And the other concerns about whether or not the town would protect the Coolidge School reuses requests to do a preservation was also part of the selectmen's discussion this winter and would not be part of this warrant article. It's part of an RFP that would be written should the warrant article pass. And after all of that is said and done, there is still no obligation for the town to sell the property. Only we're having permission to consider it.
Okay.
And I think that's consistent with how it was discussed last night.
Yes, sir, it is. We haven't talked about selling, we just talked about the opportunity
No,
to
it's how it was
To-
spoken about last night. when-
have control over the disposition of the property. We're not selling it or anything else at this point. So, we need you have a, number 11 is a rail trail update?
We have a second component to Article 10, Chris, which is about Article 17.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Nice try.
Tried. I forgot that one. Yeah, so Article 17,
So as folks may be aware from communications, the Finance Committee, as David mentioned, met last evening There was a further presentation that Ron led along with Chief Stowers, providing some additional detail in response to requests and questions that came up in last week's Finance Committee meeting, which were the subject of some comments in last week's Board of Selectmen meeting, to go into, essentially kind of talking through, well, all parties recognize that Article 17 is explicitly about requesting permission from the town to move forward with approval of the $832,000 for the design and build plans and specifications, that we include and make sure to make an explicit point in the context of town meeting so that residents are aware of how we are thinking ahead to what would be phase 3 of the project, which would be sort of the construction. That, and that was sort of summarizing it down. The fundamental ask kind of coming out of Finance Committee was we have an obligation to the town to ensure that in the context of discussion of Article 17 and the $832,000, we are also setting the stage to have a broader dialogue with the town about how we, as the Board of Selectmen, working across towns and committees with the administration of Town Hall, are setting ourselves up for a longer-term strategy to move forward. So what Andrew just shared with you is a copy of the presentation that was given last evening to the Finance Committee, and talking a bit further about what that would look like. And so kind of from that, and that's what y'all have in front of you. And, Andrew, if you want to talk a little bit more about kind of the details of that, but what we are thinking, what our recommendation is for as we're going to town meeting, and I've been working with Andrew on some slides that would be part of the presentation and comments of this article, would be refreshing the town of what has already been approved in phase 1 at the special town meeting, explaining what is being requested in this article, which is phase 2, and then discussing our approach to phase 3, which would ultimately be the funding of the fire station, but how that ties in broader terms to our strategy as a town to be managing our financial health looking forward, so that we're setting ourselves up to kind of to be disciplined about how we look both at our budgeting, to be disciplined about how we allocate our revenues and surplus of a certain amount to put against a longer-term capital stabilization fund, so that we are building to long-term fiscal health regardless of the specific project that might come into play. Part of that obviously is having a candid discussion with the town that we can't be all things to all people in each budget year, and that we're going to have tough discussions, much like we've had in the fiscal years past and the fiscal years looking forward, but to hopefully provide a level of candor, transparency, and confidence in the way that we plan to go ahead and do that. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you covered it very well. I might just add that the phase 3 piece about financing is assumed to be of great interest to the town meeting. And we'd like to be clear about how that might look. The big picture is what Ms. Steele just discussed, but the salient point for the fire station proposal itself is that the Fire Station Building Committee does not intend to be looking for debt exclusion in order to finance the fire station, that we believe we can do it through what was just described by Ms. Steele. A thorough conservative approach to budgeting will get us there.
And the commitment that would be needed by this board and future boards is what is crucial and critical to the entire success of that funding mechanism working.
That's right. You heard this last night a
Yes,
little bit.
and that's the point, is that the discussion was that you can't have situations where one department or another comes in and says, oh my God, we're not going to be able to do this year. Well, we may not be able to shift funds if we are committing ourselves absolutely to the goal of no debt exclusion for a fire station. So it takes fiscal responsibility on the part of this board and future boards. And it's almost as if, well, it is, we create a policy that then gets you know, it's consistent. And otherwise, the plan as presented has trouble.
Okay. Can I go on to the next one then?
Yep.
No, does anybody have any questions about that, Melissa? Anybody? Okay.
Is there an expectation that we take a vote at all at that? To confirm that we agree with the, I don't know what the.
No, I think
agenda item was.
no, the agenda item was merely just a discussion and information and kind of making sure that everyone was on board and aware of the revision, the way in which we'll be approaching the talk track for sponsor comments and the introduction of the warrant article.
All right, great.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for reminding me.
Very good job.
Rail trail?
Rail trail. So many of you are aware that there's a situation down at the edge of Brown Street and Concord Street where the rail trail has been going under an extensive excavation. While they were doing that, there was some hazardous material found that precipitated that. While they were doing the excavation under EPA guidelines, they found additional petroleum deposits there, basically an oil tank that had leaked and so on. That did not require more EPA oversight, but it did extend the amount of time it took them to clean the project up. They are now all but done. They're actually starting the backfilling of the excavation. The whole thing's taken much longer than you would expect to take 5,000 or 6,000 cubic feet of soil to be removed because there's a building literally on the edge of the hole they're digging. So they've had to dig very, very carefully. But in any case, we are hoping to see that work done in late May or early June. Mass DOT does not want to schedule a grand opening until they know it's done. So we're probably looking at late June or early July instead of they hope for May or June opening. But it's right in front of us. We're almost there.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very exciting. As a matter of fact, that project is the equivalent of Maynard's Big Dig because it started, I mean, you know, I give a lot of credit for the whole project to Bob Nadeau, who was on the board in his first term at the time that it was originally proposed, and he has been gone now for many, many years. So, but I have a question. Just want to confirm that that whole remediation, was there any liability found on any entity that exists relative to the cleanup, and were they you know, pursued for any liability? And lastly, did the town incur any extra expense as a result of this remediation?
Sure. So as Attorney Costa said, well, I'm not going to give you legal advice on this. The liability is one of those situations where possession is 9/10 of the law, and we own the land where the problem was. Proving that the adjacent property caused the hazardous material to appear there would have been very difficult. It may have been very logical when you look at all the details and say, oh, it must have come from, you know, this particular business's material near their rear entrance.
I think I see where your answer is going.
But it was on our land, and it's been years and years since these materials even existed in the marketplace. It's not like some chemical they bought down the street last week and threw it out there. So pursuing it would have been probably unsuccessful, and our attorney suggested it was probably going to be our responsibility. Mass DOT has done everything they can to ensure that there is no added cost to the town of Maynard or Acton for this, but they cannot guarantee that. There was a 10% overage built into the budget.
Contingency budget.
Contingency, thank you. They burned through that on this particular thing. It's approaching 7 figures at this point.
On this cleanup?
Just on this cleanup piece. And the contingency was about 600,000. So, and there were other things that were already hit for the contingency along the way, change orders and so on. In any case, Mass DOT has indicated that they have no intention of bringing us a bill But it would be the owners of the rail trail's responsibility if they change their mind.
Meanwhile, did we solve
I don't
the,
think we'll take the rail trail back, though, if we refuse to pay the bill, so.
did we solve the mystery of the stealth doggy poop station that was installed? Did y'all hear about that?
Yeah, that wasn't part of the Girl Scout
I don't
project?
know. It seems to be determined. I don't know if Aaron had, I don't think we'd started installation yet of the Girl Scouts
Well,
project.
Like behind
so-
Cumberland Farms,
I think it was a
apparently.
good Samaritan.
Oh, it was a good
according to
Samaritan.
Facebook.
That's what Facebook
Yes,
seems to
on
say. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm actually learning about it for the first time.
Yes, you'll have to ask,
You
mention to
clearly don't
Aaron.
know about Facebook.
Not a dog owner.
Thank you.
All right, so we have your report.
There's a couple of things added into the electronic version, beyond what was posted in the TA report, and they are really things that just occurred this week, even today with the Secretary asked visit. Some of you saw the photo that was up as this meeting began. We had a wellness and employee benefits fair that was hosted today at the Fowler School. I want to thank Becky Mosca for handling probably 90% of the logistics. She had a team of other helpers, but she was driving it. And I also wanted to update you on the MOA with 129 Parker Street. You'll recall a few months ago, there's some language issue that we've all kind of agreed was version control from 6 different versions. And our attorney has crafted a revision to it. It's now in front of the Capital Group. And as soon as they say that they're good with it, we intend to bring it here for your signature. Probably June 5th.
Did it, sir?
That's it.
Okay, Andrew touched on it in his report, but last Thursday, the executive director of MAPC, Mark Drayson, was here, along with Heidi Stucker, and they took a tour of the town, all different sites, and a little bus tour of Maynard, and then they also listened to and saw a presentation that Jack McCann put on from the EDC, which was about, 45 minutes to an hour. There was an excellent presentation. I've asked Jack to come and give it to us. I've asked him to do it on a night when we know that both Armand and Justine will be here, because it's it kind of ties together a lot of the stuff that the EDC is doing that we're not aware of all in one place, but it brings it all into one place, so we kind of get a feel for exactly what they're doing with murals and other things in town, and parking and the beep grants and all that type of stuff. It kind of brings all those things that we deal with, one month, one another month. It kind of puts them all in the same package, in a very neat, excellent package that Jack put together with some numbers and some history of some of the things that the EDC has been doing. So he's gonna come and do that when we can arrange a date, so everybody understands and knows what's going on with that, because it was very interesting, at least it was to me. So I asked him to
You can watch online.
make that presentation to all of us at some point. I have one question, Andrew. So we have some outside seating. How many outside seating permits have we issued?
I believe we've had 4 presented to us. Only 2 have been heard here, though.
So who have we heard? We've heard,
Maynard Pizza.
Maynard Pizza,
Main-
we found out that the land was actually 6.5 feet of their property, so they don't.
They don't even need it.
They don't need to bring an application forward.
so who are the 2 we haven't heard?
Serendipity was consent.
Serendipity, yeah.
And the third one that we have heard from is 51 Main Street, which is
The brook.
the kitchen and
Okay.
grill. But they haven't brought their alcohol application to us, so until they bring that documentation.
Okay. So,
El Appeal, I believe, is the 4th one that I'm thinking of.
but that was a consent too, I think,
Yeah.
based on the outside.
That's right, from last year's.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more of a permanent situation in terms of they put the ballasts up and everything else.
That's right.
So, if I decide I want to smoke a cigar and I want to walk down a sidewalk in Maynard, who has any authority to put a sign on the building telling me I can't smoke my cigar as I walk down the sidewalk? If I was a person who would smoke a cigar on occasion.
On a sidewalk. I don't know what the law is about public smoking. We certainly have a restrictive smoking laws in public buildings, and we can impose them on our entire property. I don't believe it extends to public ways.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, not that it's my want, but I'm sure that there's people that are, you know, you see people walking around every day with cigarettes in their hands, and they're walking, you know, down the sidewalks where people might have seating, and, I mean, you know, do you have a right to post a sign on a public, you can put on your building, I guess, but you don't really have any authority to tell someone not to stand in front of your business and smoke a cigarette.
It's
And that's a question too, like by granting these permits, are we extending what's considered part of that building for service purposes?
Because there is a restaurant smoking ban in Massachusetts, and does that extend to then outdoor
Right.
dining?
Yeah.
It's a great question.
I mean, I don't know the answer, I've seen a couple signs up, and I'm saying, well, they don't own that sidewalk, they can't tell me not to smoke there. I mean, certainly you'd have to be a different kind of human being to stand where people are eating a meal or having a drink to sit there and smoke if it was unwelcome, but by the same token, at some point it's gonna happen, and who's in the right?
And
You know-
isn't there something, though, about proximity to doorways?
I'm thinking that.
Like
and I don't know the
entrances?
I don't know.
specifics of,
I know.
or this is a hypothetical, but if you've ever been in a restaurant where cigarette smoke blows in an open doorway, you can feel like you're in the smoke, and perhaps these restaurants themselves are asking their patrons who choose to leave the restaurant to smoke to do so away from the doorway.
Yeah, I don't have any idea what it is, but I see the signs, and it's, you know, it's just, as we're starting to say, you know, outdoor dining and outdoor seating is permissible, how does that play into the fact that there's you know, smoking is still, despite the warnings, is still pretty prevalent in all areas, so.
Between our health agent and our attorneys, I'm sure we can get an answer quickly on whether or not the restaurant smoking ban extends to outdoor dining automatically, or through your consent or your decision to permit it.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, and Kate Hogan was all excited last week on Thursday, because she got her new, she got the, her bill passed, which is the tobacco age of 21 across the state. So she was here pretty happy about
We're
that.
already in compliance with, so.
Yep.
We're happy to hear it. I'm happy to hear
Yeah, no,
So am I.
it's good. And vaping too.
Yeah.
The vapors have to go to 21
It's
too.
very interesting, because I had something I wanted to discuss under Selectmen's concerns relative to vaping, which with your approval, I'd like to, since it sort of fits right in.
Carrie, go ahead.
I'll do that.
I'm done anyway. So this
You know, the
this is your comments.
All right, then I will
Use your time
make
wisely.
this, but I have one other comment to make.
Yeah, that's it. It's one chance.
In that magazine we get, whatever it's called, The Beacon, you know, there was an article in last week's edition relative to the whole issue. It addresses marijuana policies and everything else, and it addresses the fact that apparently the state law will grab in. For example, you were talking about the buffer zone around municipal buildings. It will grab in marijuana, where that will become part of the local bylaw relative to smoking marijuana within a certain distance of a municipal building, within the confines of a municipal building. If it's banned, it continues to be banned, marijuana is dragged in. But the interesting thing is that vaping is not. So local communities are now beginning the process, and it's something for us to consider, is beginning the process of actually having local bylaws that address vaping and its effects on, you know, so whether or not you want to approve or disapprove vaping. I think it's worth an issue to discuss. I think we do need to have, probably ask Lisa and her council to look at what it's all about. But I think it's an important issue because vaping is becoming, I mean, I know it's becoming a problem in the schools. I'm hearing it. And so I think we have to talk about it as a societal issue as to whether or not, I don't know enough about it to say if it's dangerous, not dangerous, if it's better for people than smoking regular cigarettes. I have no clue. But does it impact, the whole reason the whole reason society changed from the smoking was not only the health aspects, but also the health aspects of your neighbor that sits at the table next to you at the restaurant. Imagine, you know, just 20 years ago, all of us were sitting in restaurants where people were smoking right next to us. And, you know, now that's unheard of. So anyway, I think it's something for us to consider as we move forwards, and that's just something that I wanted to bring up, and possibly after town meeting, we can, talk about it as a board.
For
The
the
other-
record, the Board of Health and the health agent are already working on it.
Oh, they are? Good, glad to hear that.
I'll get an update for you in the future.
Right, okay. Would that be a Board of Health regulation relative to versus a bylaw that we would approve?
I will defer to Kelly Polichonic's
You won't
advice
give
on that.
you won't give
I don't
legal
know.
advice?
I believe she has the ability to enact a lot of rules and regs, but if the Board of Selectmen wanted to enact something different, they
Yep.
would be able to.
Okay, and then the last thing that I have, Chris, since this is my time.
No problem.
Last Thursday, even though I didn't make the town administrator's report as having been there.
I saw you, David.
yeah.
I know you were there.
Melissa, myself, Justine, and Cheryl all had the pleasure of sitting, and Andrew, all had the pleasure of sitting in, I left you out intentionally, all had the pleasure of sitting in on those senior projects presentations. And it was eye-opening and, a great experience. I'm looking forward already till next year. I saw 3. I think most of us got an opportunity to see 3. You see 3 different kids with, that have different backgrounds, different skill levels or whatever, but they all showed, from my perspective, all showed an interest in their projects and did an amazing job, and they should be congratulated for what I saw. I mean, it was great, and to see that these kids put in that much effort to have their successful project. And, I'm sure it was pressure-filled for them to stand in front of, 3 unknown people. Well, they knew the teacher, so 2 unknown people, and do their presentations, and just, there was some nerves, but most of them came through, and it was really, really good. So congratulations to the seniors, and congratulations to the Maynard Public Schools on, what they produced. That's it.
Okay. Cheryl, do you want to tell them what we did Thursday?
I was just thinking that,
Okay, all right,
Chris.
it's your turn.
So along those lines, congratulations to the Maynard Educational Foundation, the great event that they hosted on Thursday night up at the golf club, recognizing all of the grant recipients of MEEF grants over the past year, both teachers as well as students. It was a great evening. Everyone went through the grants, what they have done with it, how they used the funds, and just a real amazing assortment. And if you're not already familiar with the organization, encourage you to look into what they do, because they make some great things possible for our teachers and for our students. And it was just wonderful to kind of have that evening to celebrate them and what they've done. Echo Andrew's comments. It was equally nice to have Secretary Ash out here today. He was thrilled to hear about the progress and see for himself the progress from October to today out at Parker Street. We also went by Mill and Main to see some of the updates that they've been doing at that facility. If you haven't already noticed, but the open spaces work that they've been doing to kind of make the campus more inviting, really eye-catching for sure. And then we capped it all off with a trip to Erickson's. So, I'm just saying, nobody's giving me ice cream tonight. So this afternoon's meeting came with ice cream.
So all we've got in the time I've been here, someone.
We do have water though, so
Somebody
Becky,
bought us a
thank you.
bag of popcorn one night.
Yeah, that was Bill, right?
And then just a quick reminder,
Movie
Art
theater
Space
open that
event
night.
this Thursday, declaring independence then and now. It's in collaboration with Freedom's Way Heritage Area. Starts at 7, a presentation about kind of what was happening around this area at the time of the Declaration of Independence. So make it if you can. Live music, snacks.
I don't really have anything. I'll just echo everyone's sentiments. The senior presentations were amazing. I had done mock interviews earlier in the year with the seniors, and we dwell a lot on kind of the negatives and the funding with the school, but we never really focus on the positives too, and we have some amazing students in these schools, and these seniors are certainly an example of that.
Okay, before we adjourn, there's so next week is the town meeting, and Mr. Downey has requested our attendance at 6:30 for a little slide presentation or a discussion. And I think we're actually gonna end up hosting a meeting with the FinCom. I believe that's what it said, posted meeting with the FinCom, so 6:15, 6:30, he wants to have a pre-town meeting, so
What we're announcing to the public is that there'll be a slide presentation from the town and the schools. It's a year-in review, things that have happened since the last town meeting. It's outside of the town meeting. As people are walking in, they might be interested to see what's happening. It's not a formal part of the meeting itself.
That's
It's
separate
like
from us.
a loop.
That's separate from the 6:30 meeting.
That's what's going to start at approximately 6:30, run for maybe 15 or 20
So it's like a
minutes.
loop
Okay,
thing?
It may be a loop, we're still working out the details, but some of the slides may need some narrative.
Be there at 6:15.
Okay. And then the next meeting after that is June 5th. So motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Andrew, these are copies of what Mike Noble gave us.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie and company.